Energy is life in its most basic form, and the energy is under attack all around the world. Of course, at front and center with the Russia-Ukraine war in the United States, policy decisions, and energy is life. The more energy we have, the better life we have. And we can also look at currency reserves are being, in their most literal sense, claims on future energy. I have a guest today that I've been super excited to sit down with, and we had a super in-depth conversation. He is a commodities expert. We dug into what is going on with energy policy around the world. We talked specifically about Russia-Ukraine situation, specifically Russia energy. What happens if we lose that energy? Will we be able to continue to get out of the ground, or will it be shuttered in? We talked about the United States energy policy. We talked about natural gas, the risk of natural gas in the United States going up by 6, 7, 10 times, and when that is potentially going to happen. We talked about food. We talked about the potential famine. We talked about something he calls the starvation diet that's happening because of a famine led by lack of energy, lack of fertilizer. The risk to you, depending on what country you're in. I mean, we covered it all. My guest today is Doomberg, writing one of the best known, fastest growing publications on commodities, food, energy, fertilizer, etc. We covered all these topics and more. We had so much more to get into, so we're going to have another conversation. This is one you don't want to miss. We started a little bit philosophical so you can understand this situation from the first principles level, and then we dug into very specifics about each one of these. It's a great conversation, one of my favorites. Let's go ahead and just jump right in. So Doomberg, thank you for joining me today. You guys have kind of seemed to storm the internet by storm, taking it by storm, I suppose, by putting out amazing content that I've been enjoying. Like I was saying before we started recording, entertaining, informative, very easy to understand where people can grasp it and figure out a way to apply it, and very eye-opening at the same time. So good job on that. You kind of came out of nowhere, it seems like. Now, I know you've been, I guess give us your past. You were commodities traders or brokers before. Give us a little background on Doomberg.
Sure. And first, before I do that, Mark, real pleasure to be here. I know it's been several weeks in the making, and really looking forward to this discussion, a real highlight of our day today. And like I say, it's a real pleasure and an honor to be on your show. Congratulations to you and your team on all of your success as well.
Thank you.
As background, we weren't commodity traders. We were executives in the commodity sector with several decades worth of experience on our very small team. I personally am a trained scientist and spent a couple of decades working on sort of cutting edge research and technologies in the energy sector, especially as it applies to the heavy commodity side, energy, oil, gas, commodities, mining, and so on. And so we had that understanding, and we left industry several years ago, started a small bespoke consulting firm. Like many small business owners, COVID really wreaked havoc with our existing business. Lockdowns didn't treat us very kindly, but having said that, we decided to reinvent ourselves, as many entrepreneurs had to, and we started consulting in the content creator space, helping people like yourself, run their content creation businesses better. That worked out really well, and we were encouraged by our clients to start our own because they saw our business skills and our passion for creating content. And so really appreciate your characterization of our work, because that actually is right down the middle of the fairway of our brand ambition. Our brand ambition is that when Mark gets an email from Doomberg, the gut feeling we induce in him is, ooh, I get to read that. Mm-hmm. And the way that we try to invoke that gut feeling is we have sort of 3 principles for every piece, which is we shall be funny without being silly. We shall provoke without being polarizing, and we shall teach without being self-indulgent. And so to the extent that we are able to induce that gut feeling in you then and many others, then we can say that we have a brand. And so that is the Doomberg brand ambition. And it's nice that you spontaneously articulated that brand right back to us, because that tells me that we're making some progress in that regard. So I really appreciate it.
Well, those are some interesting tightrope walks. Funny without silly, provoke without polarizing. Wow, that's you're walking a very thin line there. One of the pieces that you recently put out was funny to me, and I got it. But your breakdown of Zoolander, which I mean, my wife and I, we've watched that movie like 100 times. I can pull out all the quotes. I love it, and so you kind of broke that down, and maybe it missed a lot of people, but it was. It was
Yeah.
good how you did that. So
Crazy pills. Yeah.
yeah, the crazy pills. But I liked how you and then you took the movie and then you kind of broke down like Zoolander's like different looks, and then showed matched that up with the different looks that the policymakers are giving us. Which I want to get into that a little bit in a minute. But so I guess it makes sense now because you're mostly seem to be writing about energy and policies, which of course with your commodity background makes sense. And I guess it was a perfect time for you guys to launch this, seeing as we're kind of seeing this whole market sector rotation into commodities and potentially into maybe one of the greatest commodity booms. Some people call it the super cycle. Do you see that timing as not intentionally planned, but I mean, do you see this sector rotation into commodities and this maybe going into a super cycle and maybe being a perfect time for you guys with your experience to kind of launch this?
Well, yes, but I would give it a slightly different view. With our experience in the industry, and one of the things that makes, I think, the Doomberg product unique is that very few people with industry experience ever take to social media to express what's really going on because they have stock options. And
Right.
when you're an executive at a corporation, you just don't go on social media.
Sure.
You have a public affairs team at your company and they handle all of that. So if you take the overlap of the Venn diagram of deep industry experience, solid scientific background, and financial training, we view the mission of Doomberg is to sort of teach non-finance concepts to financial professionals in a language they can understand. And what you would call a commodity super cycle, we would call a crisis of commodities for the consumer, and hence the name Doomberg. Like we saw this coming from a mile away. Many in the industry did. Several years of really negligent underinvestment in the maintenance capital and growth capital in these critical commodities that drive life, that drive the economy, that drive our standard of living, had to manifest itself in a crisis. And so for sure, it's called Doomberg, and people don't come to us for the optimistic interpretation of things, although we are very optimistic people in the long term. We did see this crisis coming and started Doomberg when we did for that reason, and have been writing about inflation, supply chains, energy crises from the very beginning. And rather unfortunately, some of our more dire predictions seem to be coming to pass, especially in the agricultural sector. It's a great time to do it, but it's also rather unfortunate because it means that some of the things we've been worried about are actually starting to come to fruition, and that's not good for anybody. Several of our pieces we close by saying we would be more than happy to be proven wrong or alarmist, because it's just there's not great things to write, but you can't proactively get ahead of managing the negative consequences of things unless you understand what's coming and why. And that's the service we try to provide our readers.
Yeah. Admitting you have a problem is the first step to fixing it, I guess, right? I did a video about 2 years ago, got about 1 million views on YouTube, and I said, warning, the crisis that's happening in California is coming for the world. And 2 years ago, I was down in Mexico in a little town with one dirt road, and it was September, and it was hot, and I was down there surfing, so I spent a lot of time on dirt road towns surfing, and they had electricity, no problem. I fly home to California, and we're having blackouts. And I dug into this, and I made this video, and the reason why I said it was coming for the rest of the world is because of the policy decisions that were being placed, right? The reason why California is running into energy crisis is because of the policy decisions, and I said, these policy decisions are coming for the rest of the world, so beware. And so I'm like, it's not like I had some like crystal ball, but you can see, if you're paying attention, and you can understand what's going on, and you can read between the lines, then you can see where these things lead, unfortunately. And I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, a lot of our political class basically have no idea where stuff comes from. We put out a thread over the weekend that went viral to that effect. And it's one thing to have no idea where stuff comes from, but it's another thing entirely to have no idea where stuff comes from and then try to dictate to the rest of us how the economy should be run. And I think, there's this issue in our politics, which is because of the personal destruction, the gauntlet that you have to run to win public office is just off-putting to so many talented people that, let me say it in as polite as a way as I can, we don't have the best and brightest leading us through these crises. And we like to say they manage by platitudes. If it sounds good at a cocktail party, then that becomes their platform. And, for a while that's okay. But ultimately, when push comes to shove and the chips are on the table, energy is life. And if you screw up your energy policy, you're going to screw up a lot of people's lives. And we're unfortunately just beginning to see that here. It's really at a crisis state in Europe. And the emerging economies are going to have a pretty devastating year. And the tragic part of this is all, unforced errors. Like you say, if you're one dirt road town in Mexico can have reliable electricity, and the most progressive part of the United States is facing rolling blackouts and a homelessness crisis, and you name it. What's the issue here? Like it's high time that we actually sort of stopped, took an assessment of where we're headed, tried to understand the root causes of it, put politics aside, and bring some practical people back into office. But no practical person with skills is going to want to run for public office because right. the gauntlet is too terrible and too difficult. And the best alternative to negotiated agreement is just to go make a lot of money in the private sector. So why would you? Like I last thing I would ever do is give up, the great business that we've built with Doomberg to go run for public office.
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. So it attracts those types of people that would rather rule others and tell others what to do rather than lead by example. It attracts, yes. As your point, the worst people. And it's sort of a socialistic institution, right? It is socialism. So is the university. So, a professor can go there, they can get tenure. They don't have to really produce that well. They don't get rich, but they have an okay living. They're not, there's no responsibility, or there's no, there's no accountability, I should say. And so it's kind of like the socialistic system sort of tracks those types of people that want to be in that type of system. And then, of course, they pass those ideas on to the students, and then we see it in politics, et cetera. There's a lot of stuff that I want to dig into, so I want to try and get through some of this. And then we'll come back around and talk about some of this, where I want to talk about some of the things that you've been hinting towards, and we'll get more into this kind of the politics side of things. But I want to dig through some of the more hard stuff. So we'll talk about energy, we'll talk about food, talk about supply chains, things like that. But before we dive into that, I want to start at the high part. Now, you had just said energy is life. I like that. So I want to start there. But back just real quick, you made me think of this Ayn Rand quote. Ayn Rand from Atlas Shrugged. She said that when you have to get permission to produce from men who produce nothing. And that's like the status of the world today, right? So when you have to get permission to produce from men who produce nothing, what do they know about producing? They've never produced anything. But I want to start at this high level for a minute. So you wrote, currency reserves are in the most literal sense possible claims on future energy.
Yes.
Currency reserves are claims on future energy. And then you said energy is life. And so I think a lot of people haven't taken the time to think about it from a philosophical level, which seems like maybe a waste of your time, but it's important to understand things at a first principles level so you can build your own ideas off of them rather than parroting headlines. So you said energy is life. Standards of living are dictated by access to energy. And those two facts are the undeniable conclusions of the law of physics. So energy is life. Since all humans everywhere strive for a higher standard of living, energy is the real money. And so people don't understand that. So let's break that down a little bit, how important energy is to life. Let's start on a philosophical level, and then we'll dig down into practical level.
Yeah. And you're quoting from a tweet thread that we put out a couple of weeks ago that went viral, and also a piece that we had written last year along similar lines called... I forget the piece of it today, just name of it today, but at its core, there's a fundamental law of the universe, which is has many ways to describe it. But the second law of thermodynamics, the way our preferred description of it is disorder is spontaneous. And what does that mean? Any closed system, disorder will always increase. And so humans are a highly ordered species. Like we're just a miracle of the universe. And that people understand that intuitively. Just to maintain your current order, you have to constantly be putting new energy in to beat back the forces of entropy. And not to get too scientific or philosophical, but once you sort of understand intuitively that humans don't do well in disordered systems. So like a bomb is the ultimate explosion of disorder. Whereas, the body is this very sensitive, unique machine that requires a perfect set of environmental circumstances for it to survive, let alone thrive. And so, for example, if you're wearing the outfit you have on now, shorts and a t-shirt, there's a very narrow temperature range that you're actually comfortable in.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of energy that's going into maintaining the temperature of the studio you're recording this from is consistent. It's high. And in the absence of it, you would be highly uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And if it got cold enough, you would freeze. And if it got hot enough, you would suffer from heat exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the winter in the northern states, we have to put an enormous amount of energy to keep our homes at a certain temperature. In the southern states, we have to put an enormous amount of energy to keep our homes at a certain temperature. Energy is life. Your standard of living is defined by how much energy you get to waste.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds worse than I mean it to, but you cannot impose order without wasting heat. It's like a fundamental law, the conservation of energy, the first law of thermodynamics. And so your home has right angles in it, straight lines, copper wires, and those things don't spontaneously appear in nature. They require energy to build. Your food is just stored energy. You have to eat every day because your body requires energy to maintain your body temperature, to pump your fluids around. Quite literally, your standard of living is defined by how much energy you get to waste.
Yep.
And so we provoke people with questions like, what is the carbon footprint of the Super Bowl? You're talking about all of those preseason games and regular season games and 80,000 people driving to and from the stadium and flying around on their private jets, and the trainers and the managers and you name it, and all of the food that's eaten and the beer that's consumed. It's an enormous carbon footprint for what is essentially entertainment. That's at the apex of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. While there are a billion people on the planet struggling for just the base pyramid of that hierarchy of needs. These are choices we make, and we're not judging people who make those choices. But if you're unaware of the criticality of energy and the fact that it is essentially your standard of living, then you cannot understand why it is that screwing up energy is so devastating to people.
And getting more energy is so important to people.
Getting more energy is so important to people. Now, look, we waste a lot of energy. We're all for energy efficiency. But wasting energy is the privilege of those that have a high standard of living, and a fundamental law of humanity is all humans everywhere want a higher standard of living.
Right.
You can't just decide that we're going to have a great standard of living and the country of India is not.
Right.
They want a higher standard of living too, which we're seeing as they, so once you have that framework, analyzing geopolitics, analyzing the economy, analyzing, agriculture becomes a lot easier, because then you understand, like, of course, Putin is still going to be able to market his oil to the Indian citizens because they desperately need energy. I mean, here's what we have on offer to them. You can either transact with Putin and live, or annoy John Kerry, or and in that circumstance, you would annoy John Kerry, or you could starve. When we present them with that choice, we present them with no choice at all.
Right.
If my choice is to annoy an American bureaucrat who's flying in on his private jet to tell me what I can and can't do, or to starve, there's no choice at all. And so energy is life. And the reason why energy is so inelastic in its price is because what's the price elasticity of demand for life, and who can afford to pay it? And we're seeing that now, in fact, as this energy crisis rolls out. Now, most of the time, when primary energy and commodities are long, because the industry has, the capacity to overbuild, and they almost always do, left to their own devices, people don't make that connection because it's not so visceral. Because small changes in the supply of energy don't really impact you, because you're operating in an era of excess.
Nobody thinks about oxygen.
Nobody thinks about oxygen until you run out of it, right?
Fish doesn't know it's in water, right?
Right. And so, but during periods of chronic energy shortages, like we are experiencing for the past couple of years and are only getting worse, then the rubber meets the road.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing today. When
the fish is out of water, he realizes he needs the water. And that's kind of what we're seeing today. I wanted to start there just to set the importance of what it is, because as we're saying, I mean, most people just haven't actually thought that through to understand that. And it's such a good way to look at that. And so then we can see that the wealth of nations has always come by how much access to resources, commodities, and typically energy they have. And so we can kind of map the United States and see how much it's prospered since it's discovered oil in the last 100 years. and even how we bounced back, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong or if you agree, but even how we bounced back after the 2008 great financial crash because of the fracking boom that we had. And so you can see that. And then Venezuela, with the largest oil reserves, was one of the richest nations, and now today they're not, and they can't really get their energy out of the ground. Do you see the mapping of the wealth, the energy, the money?
Yeah, and again, during times of energy abundance, economies that have high value add activity like chip manufacturing and automotive manufacturing and stuff, they tend to do well because there's surplus primary energy. During times of primary energy shortages, those economies, and unsurprisingly, their currencies struggle, and the economies where you have excess primary energy production do quite well. The U.S. is roughly balanced. We're very blessed, and there's lots of factors that go into geopolitical strength, including the strength of your institutions. Peter Zeihan's great book on the wealth of nations is a wonderful starter, a primer for people in this regard. The U.S. is blessed with the Mississippi River, with huge bounties of high quality soil. Mm-hmm. Lots of great, oceans separating us from our geopolitical enemies, deep ports, excellent education system. We have the world's reserve currency. Like, we are so blessed, and we're trying our best to squander it, which is really part of the tragedy of it all. But at a general level, all else being equal, producers of primary energy tend to do better during energy shortages, and higher value added economies tend to thrive during times of energy abundance. And because they can add value to that primary energy to make these highly ordered chips or biotechnology, or pick your technology companies, or electric vehicles, pick your favorite. These are all just expressions of energy. But in the absence of the primary needs being met, the value of those sort of sophisticated articulations of energy decrease substantially, because you care more about food and water when you don't have it. And to too many people in this country, the power comes from the light switch. Right. They don't think beyond the light switch. And so these things go in cycles, and the cycle will turn eventually. But right now we're in a sort of cyclically short primary energy, which is caused, and this is really at a depth and speed that is unrecognizable to the marginal market participant, because it hasn't happened in so long. But we will get through this eventually, but it's a real dangerous couple of years, I think. Mm-hmm.
So let's dig in a little bit into more specifics. So I want to look at the global energy and commodity outlook. We'll dig into domestic, and then I want to talk about this, renewable transition. But I was just thinking, I interviewed Alex Epstein, and he wrote the new book, The Fossil Future, and he was talking about how you have this guy from New York who flies on his private jet to his ranch in Montana and lives out in this beautiful house, out on this beautiful ranch, and thinks about how pristine nature is, and then he wants to preserve nature, not realizing all of the fossil fuel that went into him building his wealth and his ability to fly in his private jet to go enjoy that pristine nature. But it's sort of like that. So we see these problems coming because we can see the policies that are put into place. We also see, because these are long-term things. So, for example, to get energy out of the ground, it could take multiple years, if not decades, depending on what type of energy and where you're at. And so we can see that there's been massive underinvestment, and so we know that leads to less supply. So if we look at it globally, first of all, you mentioned the war on Russia. I think it's about 10% of the world's oil supply. If that's coming off the market, we lose 10%. That's not good. Less supply. It seems that, to your point, if someone's with the choice of bothering John Kerry or taking the Russian oil, they're going to take the Russian oil. And all of these sanctions seem to have only maybe helped Russia even more, because now people are just getting them in a roundabout way, and maybe through a rent seeker that they're just getting even more money from. Do you see this war really disrupting the amount of oil into the world, or has it just added a little bit of cost and a little bit of aggravation?
So we wrote a piece on this recently that caused some controversy, but we stand by all of it. And it was the piece where we referenced the Zoolander movie, and a piece was titled Crazy Pills. So this is a really important point, and one worth taking a few minutes to explain. Because energy is life, the price elasticity of demand for energy is very, very high, which means small perturbations in supply have dramatic impacts on price. There are two axioms as it pertains to Vladimir Putin and Russia and their oil. One, Putin is funding his war machine by selling energy to people who need it. 2, the world cannot live without his energy. So given that fact set, the sanction regime that we have in place today is designed to restrict his ability to transact, in other words, to attack volume. And anybody with any experience in the commodities sector knows that price matters way more than volume. And so the true way to attack Putin's revenue is not to attack his volume. And here's why. First of all, the world needs it. The world will get it. They will circumvent, ignore, hate the US for trying. This is a losing strategy. A winning strategy would be, we're going to pump as much of this stuff as we can. We're going to let Putin put his oil out onto the market, because as we saw, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, oil traded at minus $37 a barrel. Why? Because there was excess supply, and not all that much excess supply, actually, to be honest with you. Very small changes in supply demand radically change price. And one of the old expressions that we use in the industry, which is you can't ever make it up on volume. The most important lever, it's like a 6-to-1 gearing ratio, is price. And so if we want to reduce Putin's revenue, we need to pump supply. And this is what we used to do. When we, just before the first Gulf War, we worked with our allies in the oil producing countries to really ramp up production so that we could dent Saddam Hussein's impact on the price of oil. Mm-hmm. And we didn't do this here. We're doing the opposite here. And so it's a very, very simple axiom. Anything that increases the price of oil helps Putin, and anything that decreases the price of oil hurts Putin. Now, with that context, does threatening the industry with a windfall profits tax increase or decrease the price of oil? Right? Does choking off funding for fossil fuel development, does that increase or decrease the price of oil? The answers are obvious.
Right.
So, as we said in the Crazy Pills piece, actions that stunt supply enable Putin. And it's not controversial to say that, and it's not unpatriotic to say that. The reverse, it's patriotic to say it. Right. We would like, if Putin lost, we would like oil to be cheaper. We would like energy to be abundant. We would like food to be abundant. Mm-hmm. If you're going to attack the supply, if you're going to attack the industry, to attack the refiners, to withhold their permits, to build no new pipelines. We haven't built a refinery in this country since 1977. Does that help or hurt Putin right now? Helps him. Mm-hmm. And so pointing out the things that are helping your enemy in an effort to try to educate the populace so that we can perhaps switch some of those policies and hurt our enemy is not unpatriotic. It's the height of patriotism. And we're going to continue to make this case because it is true. It is just self-evident. Anybody with an ounce of experience in commodities knows that price matters way more than volume as it pertains to your revenue. And if our objective is to shrink and minimize Putin's revenue so he will not be able to fund his war machine, we need to attack. We need to pump. We need to get out there. We need to have an abundance of energy to crash the price. And in fact, all Biden would have to do is come out and say that is his intent, and the price of oil would drop by $40 overnight. Right. That would hurt Putin. Yeah. Talking about putting a price cap on oil, which is the latest G7 nonsense, is going to help Putin. Insanity. I mean, it's insanity. So it's great material for Doomberg. So in a way, in a perverse way, we should be happy. But to be totally honest with you, we would rather see excellent policies be implemented here, and we're doing the opposite. Sure.
You talked about. Well, it makes me think about just like the overall mindset, and so I think about a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset, and that's kind of like where things are going. And I'm gonna plug my own book. I just wrote a book. It's called. We took the Communist Manifesto and I rewrote it. It's called the Uncommunist Manifesto, and same 4 chapters, same context of each chapter, but basically just flipped on its head. Just going to do a book. We're going into a book launch here right now. But we talked a lot about what you talked about before with entropy, and we talked about how capitalism is not a system. It's not a political system. Capitalism is just natural emergent order. It's you had a campfire, I killed a rabbit, and hey, how about if I cook my rabbit on your fire and we just share, right? Like little kids in preschool, they trade. And I think about that, and we talked about in the book about overcoming entropy and how capitalism does that. But we also talked about coercion versus cooperation. And so this is kind of like coercion, like coerce the world into like not using his oil. But also then back into the scarcity mindset, the better way, as you're proposing and I would agree with, is to outcompete, which would typically have been the American way. Let's just be better. Let's just produce more. And it seems like everybody would benefit from that. But of course, that's not where we're at. Now, you set the stage on that, and I agree with that. But you referenced Peter Zeihan earlier. Now, he's been saying, if we get more into the nuts and bolts on this, he said that because of the sanctions that have been placed on Russia, that, maybe they're still circumventing for now, but most of the big service providers have actually pulled out. So you've got the Halliburtons, et cetera, BP, that have pulled out of Russia, and now they don't have the know-how, the technical know-how, the service providers there to even get the oil out of the ground, and they're backing up their wellheads. They're going to have to start shuttering them in, and within any period of time, Russia's going to be unable to pump out oil.
So love Peter Zeihan, and you can love somebody's work, consume a lot of it, and not agree with all of it. Mm-hmm. I think in some ways, Zeihan is a bit of an alarmist, and in other ways, perhaps a bit too naive is too strong of a word, underestimates the capacity of the people that are still transacting with Russia to fill the gap left behind by the Western departure from those oil fields. So, for example, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, India, and China are all openly transacting with Russia today. And if you ever been to Saudi Aramco's control center, you'll understand that this is a company that has some engineering prowess, or the Chinese national oil companies. For all of their faults, and there are many. This is not like we had a monopoly on petroleum engineering, and in fact, given the sort of brand that field has been labeled with in the Western countries, the Chinese universities are cranking out a lot more petroleum engineers than we are over here in the West. And so I think it's slightly foolish and a bit arrogant to think that only Western Europe and the US are capable of operating oil fields. It's just, I do actually genuinely love Zeihan's work, and on this small but important point, we just happen to have a disagreement.
So while it may be true that some of those U.S. service providers have moved out,
yes,
there are other people that can fill their spot, and so Russia is still producing gas with new service providers, and they're not backing up.
And well, they may, but okay. Look, well, just before I get to that point, China is building 150 nuclear reactors today. Fudan University is a fantastic world-class university churning out amazing students. The competition in education in China dwarfs what's going on in our education system over here. Same thing in India. IIT Mumbai is a brilliant, these are fantastic universities with geniuses in them.
They're teaching STEM while we're teaching cultural Marxism.
And look, if we're just going to sit here and naively assume that, quote, they can't do it, that's dangerous. Now, that's our position. Let's assume Zeihan is right, that oil is going to stop flowing. That's a really bad outcome for the world. Mm-hmm. That's the second axiom of our sanctions analysis. The world will not and cannot live without Russia's oil, and their natural gas, and their fertilizer, and their commodities that they mine using those deposits. And so, even if Zeihan is right, that's not a good outcome. But I would say it would be foolish on our part to underestimate the capacity of the 4 billion people still transacting with Russia to make sure that this critical, necessary suite of commodities find their way to their markets. Petrobras in Brazil is filled with great engineers. India, we've outsourced a lot of this engineering work to those various countries that we're saying aren't capable of supporting Russia in this critical endeavor. It's a bit of denialism on our part and a bit of naivete on our part, in our personal view. And look, I've worked in heavy industry for a couple of decades and traveled to all of these countries. Like, I'm aware of where the skill sets lie. The U.S. for sure, the Halliburtons of the world are cutting edge. Cutting edge only really matters if you're fighting for a few incremental percentage points of cost so that you can squeeze out more profit. The existential aspects of it are a whole different story. And I would be in the camp that doesn't underestimate the capacity of the Chinese to help the Russians keep the oil flowing.
Got it. Oh, makes sense. I like that. And then even you said we can't go without that Russian oil. It's about 10% of the world's oil. We saw there was a clip going around of Macron and Biden that supposedly was caught off camera with a hot mic or something. Maybe it was staged. We don't know. But they're talking about how the Saudis can't increase the amount of oil. So is it possible that the U.S. and Saudi couldn't increase the amount of oil to offset that 10% loss, or they couldn't do it in enough of a time period? Like we can't get it online fast enough.
This is a great mystery of OPEC Plus, which is just how much spare capacity do they have and where does it come from? And many have made this case. Our friend Josh Young at Bison has been ringing this bell for a couple of years. Bison Interest, I believe, is the name of his firm.
Yeah, I've been following him on Twitter.
Yeah, this is pretty well commonly known in the industry. There are lots of sort of, there's a difference between the reporting markets and the real markets sometimes. Like Iranian oil has been finding its way to the market despite sanctions. This is just kind of widely known. And Venezuelan oil is still flowing around. And so, by and large, this is I'm lost for words here, but this is the markets because of the criticality of the underlying commodities, as you say, sort of capitalism, right? It just finds its way of solving itself in ways that are kind of difficult to predict.
Okay. Now, when we let's move into like U.S. domestic policy specifically, we see Biden saber rattling, talking about threatening the oil companies. You already made the case, like we're going to increase taxes on them, et cetera. One thing, I did a video last week talking about the hidden reason gas prices are going up, and I said it's not about the oil. Oil's been way higher, and gas prices have been lower. But as you said, there no new refineries have been built in 5 decades at this point. So there's a bunch of policy stuff going on there. But first, back to, I guess, the U.S. capability. There's been a lot of reports showing that the shale fields are running dry. It seems to me that maybe the wells run dry because over time they get used up. But you have to constantly find, explore, and drill for new wells. So do you see? And you would know the data. I don't. I just look at headlines. But Is it a case where the U.S. is really running out of oil, or we just haven't been reinvesting enough into it where we can actually just continue to get the oil going?
So great question, complex answer. I'll try to distill the essence of it to the best of my ability here. So you're correct in the sense that the shale revolution is sort of a different way to produce oil, burned a lot of investor capital, but led to the U.S. being able to pump up to 13 million barrels of oil a day before COVID. Since the COVID crash, we have been trying hard to get back up to that level, but we've not made it all the way. We are now back up to 12 million barrels of oil a day. And one of the things that is very fascinating and why we believe that Putin's oil needs to find its way to the market is that 1 million barrel of oil gap is roughly what we've been releasing from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to make up that difference, okay? And with Putin, you're talking 10 million barrels of oil a day. And so imagine a world where 4 million of those barrels didn't find its way to the market. The price of oil would be $400 a barrel, $500 a barrel. It would collapse the economy. And so on the flip side, it's a foolish bet to bet against the technical and innovative chops of American energy companies.
Right.
And there are some analysts out there who we respect a lot who think that we've reached sort of peak production in the shale patch. I would argue that that this is probably a foolish bet, although I understand the basis of their analysis.
Well, the whole world worked on a theory of peak energy that was disproven when we got fracking, right? So
no question. And there are advances in fracking today. Now, having said that, an argument in their favor is what we're seeing just to get to that 12 million barrels a day is a decapitalization of previously drilled but unfinished wells. And so they're called DUCs, drilled but uncompleted wells. Mm-hmm. And those have been coming steadily down since COVID, which basically means the easy oil is being tapped and it's still not enough. And if we don't see a huge uptick in drilling soon, there's thoughts that maybe you could see a rolling over of U.S. oil production despite our best efforts. And if that happens, all bets are off because, in a time of energy shortage, every incremental barrel counts. And, just things like what's going on in Libya today or Ecuador. it's a big deal. And so if we take all of that context and then try to attack the supply of Putin's oil, and by the way, if we took 2 million barrels of Putin's oil off the market, so he loses 20%, okay? The price of oil is going up 50%, and he's going to make more money.
Okay.
Because you can't make it up on volume.
Right.
This is the whole point of our piece. For highly inelastic products,
right,
you have to increase supply to affect price if you want to change revenue.
Right.
If we were able to miraculously pump 5 million more barrels a day tomorrow, oil would drop to $20 a barrel, and Putin would have far less money to fund his war machine. This is just so transparent to people with commodity experience, and frustrating to see the administration doing everything in its power to do the opposite. So when you have a commodity crisis, you have two levers. You have supply and you have demand.
Right.
The current administration is hurting supply and handing out checks to people that inevitably spurs demand.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing the opposite of what they should be doing.
On both sides.
Now, on both sides. Now, we understand and empathize with the need to help those at the lower end of our economic ladder deaden the pain of the commodity inflation they are experiencing. We do not object to that, at least emotionally. But logically, if you are truly trying to affect the price of oil so that you can lower the revenue that Putin will realize and therefore choke off the funding of his war machine, you have to bring demand down and supply up. And all of our actions today, virtually all of our actions today, are doing the opposite in both regards. And then the frustration sets in when people realize that the ruble is strengthening and his revenue is up and oil prices are higher and people are still transacting. Of course, they're still transacting. 4 billion people are pursuing international trade with Putin's Russia. It is not a unipolar world anymore. Mm-hmm. And so those are the facts. We can either accept the facts as axioms and devise smart strategies that will affect the outcome that we desire, or we could deny them, call people who point out these facts unpatriotic, and lose.
Yeah.
Those are the choices.
If we don't like what you say, we'll just censor you.
Yes.
So try and get back to the question that I was asking about the capacity. We don't know in Saudi Arabia, but in the United States, we don't really know. Potentially, we're running out in the way that we are right now because we haven't been reinvesting both into exploration as well as new technologies. So maybe on the path that we're on, maybe we are starting to see a dwindling. However, we don't know, but maybe if there was a free market where these people were able to invest back into their technologies and invest back into exploration, we might be able to unlock lots more oil that we don't know about. Does that summarize?
100%. Okay. I totally agree with that. And especially in the natural gas sector, Toby Rice, the CEO of EQT, was on the aforementioned Alex Epstein's great podcast, Power. I forget what it's called, but he made the case, like at $4 a million BTU natural gas, we have a huge amount of economically recoverable resources that we could bring to the market. We just need certainty.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I have a big question about that, right? So the United States has been a big beneficiary of natural gas, and through the fracking boom, we've discovered so much natural gas that it was so cheap we didn't even bother to capture it. So of course we have the venting, we have the flaring, et cetera, which has led to a lot of Bitcoin mining, which I don't know if we'll have time to talk about later. But we have this natural gas, and it's allowed the United States to have all this basically free natural gas that then we started to convert our electricity plants into running off natural gas, and everything. The homes are on natural gas, et cetera. We've had a very low price. However, the rest of the world pays a very high price. And it seems that the U.S. has been isolated from the global price of the natural gas markets because we're limited on how much we can export. And I've seen some reports that show that, because we have to build these LNG facilities, and won't go deep into that, you obviously know what I'm talking about. Hopefully the listener does as well. But if we build more of these LNG export facilities, then we'll be exporting more natural gas, which then could bring the U.S. natural gas price up to the global natural gas price, which could take it from, I don't know where it's at today, $8 for MCF or whatever, up to, 35 or something like that. Is that something that you see? Is that a risk for the United States?
Yeah. So what you're basically, it's 650 today because of that explosion at the Freeport LNG has caused this backlog.
Which exactly proved the point, right? If we export less, it comes cheaper in the U.S.
Yes. So basically what you're talking about is there are two jaws of arbitrage open today on natural gas. There's regional, and then there's the arbitrage between gas and oil, natural gas and oil. And this is probably worth spending a few minutes on. The problem with natural gas is it's a gas. And unlike oil, which is a liquid, it's really difficult to transport natural gas across long distances. So over land, that problem is solved. You build pipelines. But to go from the US to Europe, you have to chill this gas to very low temperatures to transform it into a liquid, put it on highly specialized boats, burn some of that natural gas to keep it cool as you traverse the Atlantic Ocean, let's say, on the journey from the Gulf Coast to the Netherlands. And then you need specialized regasification facilities to accept the gas on the back end. And so, unlike oil and unlike coal, which is even easier to transport because it's a solid, natural gas is a highly regional market. So, as you correctly described, during the shale boom, not only did we find so much natural gas, but we had what's known as associated gas. So while you're drilling for oil, you get all this extra natural gas that, isn't the primary purpose of your well. And we had no place to put it. Now, on an energy content basis, if you take the price of natural gas and multiply it by 6, rough approximation, that is the energy equivalent of dollars per barrel of oil. And so at $10 gas, that would be $60 oil. Okay.
Okay. Is that because of the energy density equivalent?
It's how much energy, because one of the complexities with energy is they're quoted in different units, dollars per barrel, dollars per million BTU, dollars per gallon. And so one way to levelize that to get an approximation of where the arbitrages exist is to put them all in the same units. And so if you take, how many million BTUs are in a barrel of oil, turns out it's roughly 6 million. And so if you multiply the price of natural gas by 6, you get an approximation for what natural gas is selling for in terms of dollars per barrel of oil. And so at today's price of $6.50, that's $39 a barrel oil. And WTI oil is trading at $110 as we record this. And so, and as you correctly said, in Europe today, natural gas is trading for $40 per million BTU, which is the equivalent of $240 a barrel oil.
Right.
See? And so you have two forces of arbitrage bringing the price of natural gas up in the US. You have the fact that Europeans are willing to pay, 7 times more than what we're paying for the same molecule? And oil is selling for 3 times for the same energy density. But because we have so much extra natural gas because of shale, that supply-demand dynamic is overwhelming.
And we can't export it fast enough.
And it can't export it. And we were building out export capacity. And so to take natural gas from the US to Europe, you need an export LNG terminal, which chills it, highly specialized, liquefies it. Right. They bring the temperature down, right? Like if you bring if you boil water, it's a gas. And if you bring it the temperature down, it's a liquid. And then if you bring it even lower, it becomes a solid. Well, to take a natural gas, methane, and make it a liquid requires very low temperatures. And that's an engineering feat to be able to do that safely. Once it's liquefied, you put it on these boats that keep it as a liquid. These boats go across the ocean, and then they're regasified in a safe way at an LNG import terminals. Both ends of that journey are multi-billion-dollar investments that take 5 to 6 years to pull off, assuming you have complete collaboration with the government on permitting. Now, the U.S., let's give some round numbers. Billion cubic feet per day, BIF is sort of the standard industry. Let's just say the U.S. produces about 95 BCFs. We had exported no BCFs until the shale revolution, and over the past decade have built up 12 BCF of export capacity. We recently had an explosion, and there's a lot of intrigue around this explosion.
Coincidental.
At the Freeport LNG export terminal in the U.S., and that terminal basically exported 2 BCFs, or somewhere around 20% plus or minus of our total export capacity. Now, it's a very small amount of our total production. But from Europe's perspective, 80% of that Freeport LNG, 80% of the boats leaving Freeport were sailing to Europe to help fill their tanks ahead of the upcoming winter. And so there's a lot of intrigue about what may have caused that quote unquote explosion. And a couple of days later, we saw video of certain explosions in Russian oil and gas infrastructure that might cause the conspiratorial among us to connect a few dots, perhaps. We've been very careful to not draw that conclusion, but it doesn't take much to assume that maybe there's been a little bit of cyber activity going on back and forth.
Well, you can highlight the dots and let other people draw the lines between them.
But per your question about natural gas, at 650 per million BTU. In some ways, that's really expensive for us because last year it was $2. Couldn't give it away.
Right.
And I heat my home with it, and the electricity that comes to my home at the power plant that serves my community uses natural gas. And so, in some ways, the price of my energy has tripled since last year. In another analysis, it is a third of the price of oil, and it is a sixth of what the Europeans are paying. And so, in the long run, as I'm sure you know, arbitrages get closed.
If we can export enough.
Well, if you're talking about 600% difference, that's a huge, in a capitalistic system, a huge driving force to deploy capital, because you have clients willing to pay a lot more than it costs you. In the meantime, what we're seeing is, in a way, a rejuvenation of certain aspects of American industry that rely on natural gas as the key input, for whom their products are priced globally. So if you're a fertilizer producer, CF Industries, you're sourcing your natural gas from the US. You're making it into fertilizer. Natural gas is, pick your 80% of the cost of fertilizer. You have this huge advantage over your European and Asian competitors. And fertilizer is priced globally. You could think of fertilizer as nothing more than a solid form of natural gas, and CF Industries is capturing that spread. If you're making plastics and the plastic is sold on the international market at a global price, your competitor might be based in Ludwigshafen at the BASF plant that is in danger of being shut down, or you might be in China, which is energy poor as well. You get to sell at the price they need to earn their cost of capital, but your input costs are radically lower than your competitors, and so you're living high on the hog, as we might say. These are all the interesting supply-demand dynamics that flow from the fact that natural gas is a gas. Like the important word is gas. Right. And so this creates these huge arbitrages. Gas here is cheaper than oil. Gas in Europe is more expensive than oil. Gas in Asia is more expensive than oil. It's really a remarkable thing to see. And this explosion at Freeport LNG helps you and me, because it takes the risk of a gas shortage in our winter off the table, because all of that extra export capacity is now being rerouted to storage facilities so that we can have enough natural gas to get through the winter. So in a way, personally, I'm a little bit relieved. But in the long run, things that do the same thing can't sell for different prices indefinitely. Oil and gas are both burned to generate heat, to do work. And in the long run, there should be a thin bar of transportation costs that separate prices in different regions. We're not there yet, but the economy will eventually work its way there.
Do we have a timetable though? So, for example, we know there's 6 more plants under permitting that will be built in the next 3 years, and then when those are done, then we should be at equilibrium with the world, or it's going to take 10 years, or we'll never get there.
This is a deeply philosophical question, and one that I've spent many a neuron contemplating. How much intra-market penetration do you need for price equilibria? And I don't know the answer. My gut feeling is it feels like 10 to 15%. If you have an active 10 to 15% intra-market penetration, you will be able to shave off 95% of market dislocations just by rerouting product. I don't know.
And how far away how far away are we from achieving that 10 to 15%?
Probably 5 to 6 years. If we don't blow up each other's export terminals. It's if
the whole world doesn't end before then.
Well, look, there's a huge all these commodities cyclical, right? The cure for high prices is high prices, even when you're attacking supply. There is a wave of LNG projects on the books, and Qatar and Australia and the US, and the Germans are actively building out import terminals, and there's innovation in the space, much like we saw with shale, with floating terminals where you can maybe circumvent the time and cost needed to be able to receive this stuff.
And who knows, maybe the UK and the Netherlands will tap back into their reserves one day too.
Maybe
right?
They will. Maybe Europe will start fracking.
Yeah.
They have huge. This is the weird part. The U.S. does not have a monopoly on frackable fields, right? They're all over the world. Right. We're the only ones that have done it, and we've become an energy superpower again because of it. Why the rest of the world decides not to do it is a real mystery.
Well, we know why, but why they decide to have those policies, we don't know. Man, we are running. Time is dwindling down, and I had so many more topics I wanted to dig into, but
Hey, let me come back again. Always happy to do a round two.
I wanted to dig into the EV renewable transition. We've really seen how just in the last week or two, we're starting to see, Germany and the rest of EU and even Japan the other day are coming back off their renewable transition targets on vehicles, which I thought was pretty interesting. I wanted to talk about fertilizer and food. I wanted to get into some of the stuff that you wrote the other day about the part about publications like yours coming into the crosshairs. So,
happy to talk about all of them. pick your favorite.
I was a little overambitious, I think, today. Let's talk about the food.
Sure.
I've seen reports. So we have three types of fertilizer, right? So potash coming from Russia, phosphate coming from China, and then we have nitrogen coming from Europe, right, with natural gas. And it seems like all three of those are under attack. And sure, there's a little bit of fertilizer coming from different areas, but that was kind of the main three, which China's not shipping, Russia's not shipping, Europe isn't producing. And these are things that take time to play out, because if you don't have a good plant this year, then it's going to take another year and a half before you can make up for that. And it seems some reports that I'm seeing are showing severe shortage in fertilizer, severe shortage in crops, and potentially massive problems with potentially people starving over the next year or two.
Yeah, it's a big pill to swallow. But we wrote a piece last October called Starvation Diet, laying out a lot of this. So just a few corrections. Potash is Belarus and Canada, for example.
But isn't Canada's a small percentage compared to Belarus?
It all depends on what you're measuring.
Okay.
So I would say this: it doesn't take, again, these are inelastic materials,
Sure.
So it doesn't take a huge percentage to really drive a lot of prices.
Sure.
Fertilizer is made all over the world. It's just natural gas in Europe has made the production of fertilizer there very poor.
Got it.
But for sure, a big tell for us was China limiting the exports of phosphates. That is what triggered us to write Starvation Diet all the way back last October. And we
I'm gonna have to go back and read that. And by the way, he keeps throwing out his newsletter. I subscribe to it, and you guys should too. We'll have the link in the description below. But Go ahead, keep going.
Yes, Doomberg.substack.com. You just give my commercial. So one of the interesting things, and to tie two of the things you want to touch together, phosphates are used in batteries, and China is making a big push to be the dominant player in the production of electric vehicles. And that very same phosphate that is going into those lithium-ion batteries is being diverted away from the farm field. And so these are all choices and trade-offs that we have to make. There is not an infinite amount. And phosphate is mined, powered by vehicles using diesel. And we're in a diesel shortage.
Imagine that.
And so, everywhere you look, it's the same challenge, right? And literally, ammonia, which is probably the most important of the three. I mean, you can't make it without natural gas today. The Haber process is hugely energy intense. The number one input into the production of fertilizer is natural gas. So when the price of fertilizer reached 15 times what it was in the US, in Europe, back in February, you could see very well that the next thing that would happen is a fertilizer crisis, and that the chemical industry would collapse. These are delicate supply chains that have been built around cheap, abundant energy. You take away the cheap and the abundant, and you don't have your supply chains. It's just not. It's a very simple dot connecting, and so it's a real issue. I think we need another harvest to see the results. And it's not just fertilizer; it's herbicides and fungicides, and the diesel that powers the tractors, and the labor that does the harvesting. All of those things are in short supply. We wrote a piece called "Farmers on the Brink" that sort of captured all of this several months ago. But the earliest where we really put our, the Doomberg flag into the ground on upcoming famine was Starvation Diet. And I believe we wrote that on October 10th of last year, or maybe October 22nd, one of those days. And I would encourage people listening to read it. It's a very short piece, very blunt piece. We laid much of the blame at the feet of, I believe, Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, who has been directing the defund the fossil fuel movement from the financial side, and is, of the people in the world, probably personally more responsible for a lot of this than anybody else.
And I'm just going to throw out, by the way, he's doing all of that with your money, not his money. So he's managing people's retirement accounts and pension funds, and he's using the power of your money to influence the world in a way you're probably not okay with. So maybe take a look at that. But
And, the guys that got a degree in real estate, I mean, nothing against degrees in real estate, but I don't think it qualifies you to dictate the global energy policy.
yeah. But anyway, so tell us about the famine, the starvation diet, and the upcoming famine. I mean, what are we looking at?
So what we're looking at is in the U.S., we will pay the clearing price. In the wealthy nations, the clearing price will be set. We won't do without, and we will make sure that the lowest members of our economic ladder get stimulus checks like we're seeing. And that's only going to serve to export inflation to countries that can least afford it. So we're seeing the beginnings of social unrest, political upheaval, revolutions in the emerging economies that are already on the brink.
Sri Lanka, Ecuador,
yeah. Peru. We're going to see some African countries topple here pretty soon. We like to say that on the path from abundance to starvation is riot. People tend not to starve quietly. And so they will take action. They will blame their political leaders. They will raise up. They will take arms. And we're seeing that, and we'll see more of it. It's difficult to predict exactly where. This is highly chaotic, non-linear type systems analysis, but it at the highest level, it's inevitable. And the reason that is because we only have so many calories to go around. And the price elasticity of demand for life is high, and those who can afford it are in the developed world, and they will pay it. Push comes to shove. It's annoying for you and I to fill up our vehicles at these prices. It's not as existential for us to fill up our vehicles at these prices. It's annoying that the cost of food at the grocery store has gone up to me, but my children are still going to eat, knock on wood, by and large, absent a major crisis from here. And in such a major crisis, the economies we're describing will have long since fallen over the cliff. And so the U.S. is relatively energy balanced. We have been blessed with the breadbasket of the world. All of the advantages that Zion would say make us a superpower are true. We'll be okay. But the more we have to pay to ensure that, especially in election season, the more expensive it's going to be for those right on the brink and can no longer afford it. And there's some dangers that this might not all work out. It might not be just that we'll pay a lot, other people will suffer, and we'll just move on. We've outsourced an enormous amount of our mining and our manufacturing to the very same countries that will struggle in this environment. And you can't take a brick from the bottom to put it on top indefinitely without the whole structure collapsing. And so that's something to keep an eye on.
So poorer countries are not looking so good. Unfortunately, there's going to be some starvation, potentially riots, and political upheaval. If there's a magic wand and we could magically reverse this, it doesn't fix it, right? Because it's going to take a year and a half, 2 years to kind of work its way back through.
I would say that a change in mindset would go a long way. Price elasticity demand works both ways.
But I mean, this fall's harvest is already done, and now we have to wait till the next spring plant and then another fall harvest. So we're like a year and a half away.
But there's some mindset things we could do.
Okay.
I'll give you a small example. In the developed world, almost all the wasted food happens on the plate. In the developing world, almost all the wasted food happens in the supply chain. They have unsophisticated cold chains and storage. But by the time that food gets to the plate, you're not wasting a bite.
Right.
When was the last time you saw somebody at a restaurant really clean a plate?
Yeah, we don't.
We waste an enormous amount of food in this country. And
my mom used to tell me when I didn't want to eat my food, someone in Africa starving would want that.
That's the sort of classic thing we all heard as children.
Yeah.
And look, it's true. Like the amount of energy, like imagine, and look, I'm the worst. I have a poor appetite, and the serving sizes at restaurants are too big for me. Like if I eat half of that plate, I've destroyed half of the total integral of energy that went into producing it. It's just wasted, goes in the garbage. Whereas if you're in a poor country, the privilege of eating a peanut butter sandwich in a bag of chips,
right.
You're not wasting a gram of that.
Right.
And so, for example, we could have an honest conversation with ourselves in this country and say, hey, maybe we ought to have a clean plate campaign. let's not just assume we are allowed excess and this excess is our natural born right. Let's show the rest of the world who's struggling a little respect by preserving food, eating our leftovers, not wasting anything. Let's open up the spigots on natural gas production, on oil production. Let's reinvigorate our nuclear power industry. Let's get over some of the silly policies that are, we're not serious yet. Right now, it's still political. We're still managing to the optics.
Yeah.
And so we have a long way to go. And unfortunately, that means we're going to export a lot of pain.
Yeah. And this goes back to Alex Epstein again, Fossil Fuels. Go read that book if you haven't already. And he makes the case that most of the world, 3 billion people in the world, are suffering from lack of energy. And so, if we would get them more energy, could their supply chains be fixed where they could get better food to the plate, kind of a thing? And so, those are things that could be done, maybe not right away, but could be done in the long run. And he said, these climate scientists or these climate alarmists are saying that we're going to have this catastrophic future, apocalyptic, he says. But there's 3 billion people in the world today that already are living that.
Yeah.
They're already in an apocalyptic world today. I want to just, we'll go back to the U.S. for a minute and then we'll probably wrap it up. But in the U.S., so you made the case that you don't think anybody in the U.S. will starve. We'll just pay more. It's going to be annoying. And probably, the poorer people will get assistance from the government. They'll have less selection, maybe not as much steak anymore, but they're still going to have food on their plate. What about the centralization of the food supply chain with maybe gas shortages or rationing that could happen this year? 85% of the meat in the United States is processed in 4 plants. Do you think there could be, with gas rationing, supply chains breaking down and then problems getting food around, or not a big threat?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's certainly possible. Nobody sort of stands at the top of the pyramid indefinitely. It's a metastable state, and we are capable of squandering the advantages that the generations that came before us provided us. There's no question about it. By and large, our base case is that sanity will prevail. Joe Biden understands the threat of high gasoline prices ultimately. He has still not yet decided to stare down the more radical elements of the environmentalist movement that is dictating policy that is leading to his popularity being where it is. He will eventually, or he will be replaced.
Yeah.
I believe that to be true. I think saner minds will prevail. And it's kind of a Pascal's wager situation for us. I don't want to live in a world where that's not true.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and assume that that's going to be the base case. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have some, discipline around making sure that that happens and to do your part to advocate for such policies,
right.
Which in our own small way, we're trying to do. We have a very large readership. Many people in government read our pieces. Many people in industry read our pieces. We speak what we believe to be the truth. We provoke without being polarizing. We teach without being self-indulgent, like we've talked about. And in our own way, as citizens of a free country with freedom of speech, we are trying our best to do our part to bend the curve of policy by providing facts, data, information in an entertaining way that can be consumed and distills complexity. It makes the complexity of science and the technical issues at the heart of these matters accessible to as many people as possible.
Yeah. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and probably just wrap it up. I think that was a great way to end it. I keep saying that reality is going to slap them in the face, which is what's happening. And hopefully it slaps them and they come around sooner than later. And to the point you just made, I'm going to echo, is that I believe that rational minds will prevail. I believe reality will always win. Their systems will fail. But how much pain do we have to endure before we get to the other side of that? And a lot of that comes down to you and I and sharing these ideas and everybody else spreading these ideas. I like to say spreading brush fires in the minds of men, from a Samuel Adams quote. And so everybody listening, take these ideas, read Doomberg's newsletter. We'll link it down below. Share these ideas with other people. Let's spread this, and hopefully rational minds will prevail sooner than later, and we'll get back on the other end of it. So shout out your Substack again. Anything else you want to bring attention to?
Yeah, first, thank you so much, Mark. It was a fantastic discussion. Happy to come back anytime. We didn't even scratch Bitcoin or some of the other topics that we need to talk about, and really thoroughly enjoyed it. You're a true pro, and happy to be here. You can find us at doomberg.substack.com. And you can also follow us on Twitter at DoombergT. We have a lot of original content that we put out on Twitter. We view Twitter as sort of the free front end of everything Doomberg, and that's where we find our audience. And as toxic as Twitter can be, it is the town square. We love engaging. We put a lot of great original work out there. So become one of the more than 110,000 followers we already have on Twitter. at Doomberg T. Great to see you out there. And Mark, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. I'm subscribed. You should too. We'll link it down below. And thanks so much. All right, that's a wrap on the conversation with Doomberg, one I was really looking forward to. I've been enjoying reading his newsletter. We're going to link to that down below. We covered a lot of topics. As I said, there was more that I wanted to get into, so we'll have him back on in several weeks. If you want to, leave me a comment. Let me know if he's somebody I should have back on and what other questions you'd have me ask. Like I said, it was an amazing conversation. The thing I would ask for you to do, well, besides subscribe to this channel if you're not already subscribed, give me a thumbs up on this video, but more importantly, take these ideas and this information and go spread them to somebody else. All right. That's how we're going to win this thing. I'm hopeful. I believe we do. I believe rational minds, I believe reality will prevail, but only if we do our part. So subscribe. Like the video, but more importantly, share this information. Share the video if you need to, or just repeat what you've learned. Either way, it's up to you. That's what I got for today, all right? To your success. I'm out. Since you've stayed to the end, I know you like this video, which means you're probably gonna really like this video right here and this video right here.